Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. Well, I am so very happy to have my guest today. She is an author. Her name is Kayla Marie Pierre, and she's going to talk about a book that she's written, a children's book. So I'm looking forward to this interview. So without further delay, here is Kayla. So Kayla, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. Hello to the Total Podcast audience. As Phil said, I'm Kayla Marie Pierre, and I write culturally diverse stories from picture books to novels. And my latest one you can see on the screen of my background is Happy Harper, Grandpa Comes Home. And it's a story about a Haitian American little girl who's so excited her grandfather's finally coming to live with her in Brooklyn, and he's emigrating from Haiti. So it's the day preparing for his arrival. So super excited to be here and to be able to share a little bit about being a writer and some of my background.
Thank you, Kayla. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I truly appreciate it. So first of all, before I get into the meat of things, how many books have you written? It sounds like you've written a lot.
Sure. So as I said, I write from picture books to novels. The thread is that they're all culturally diverse. So I have written from a traditional publisher. This is a Ruby Bridges book.
Oh, wow.
For fourth and fifth graders that is taught in schools to teach them about the civil icon Ruby Bridges. Grandpa Comes Home is my latest. This is part of a series. This is the first one. With the next couple of ones coming soon. And then I do Christian romance under the name Naomi Joseph, and I have a series of 4 out.
For you, what has been the most fun for you about just your writing career in general?
What has been the most fun? So I've always been a super creative, like I live in my brain, like I'm never bored because there's always some story being written in my head from the time I was a little kid. I'm the kid who would walk around distracted because everything was happening so colorfully in her mind that everything else was kind of muted. The rest of the world was just kind of gray, but in my mind, it was all full of colors. So the idea of just being able to create characters and being able to create their world and see them come to life and bring together how they interact with other characters in the book, like that is my absolute favorite part, just the creativity of the process. Just being able to be like, oh my goodness, like these characters now take up a life of their own. They're telling me how to write them. So it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Well, let's start now with where you grew up. Tell us a little bit about your childhood and your family life, if you will, and where you went to school.
Sure. So I like to say I'm made in Haiti and bred in Brooklyn. So I was born in Haiti and raised here in Brooklyn, mostly Flatbush. Some people call it Prospect Lefferts Gardens, but still Flatbush to us. So really just grew up all around Brooklyn. Grew up in a very tight-knit Haitian family where you told the line between being American and being Haitian. So had to be really Haitian at home and then American in school. And really just it gave you a perspective where you were able to step back and see a lot of the commonalities that either side did not see, but also see kind of the unique quirks or differences that really made each kind of culture really rich. So yeah, like I said, grew up really tight knit. It was my grandparents, my mom and my siblings and my aunt and cousins. We kind of followed each other around Brooklyn. So either we were all living in the same apartment, or we were living in the same building, or we were living in the building right next door. Like that was kind of like the little nucleus for us where we always were with each other.
And in terms of siblings, how many siblings do you have?
How many siblings do I have? So I have an older sister, Darlene, and then I have 4 younger brothers.
Wow.
Yes, Reginald, Stanley, Edward, and Mackenzie. They would hate being put out on blast, but I'm going to put them out on blast anyway.
Oh, that's
Yeah, I'm
awesome.
the
So,
second oldest. Mhm.
wow. Wow, that's pretty amazing. So now where did you go to school in terms of college? And
Mhm.
tell us about that life for you.
So I went to school at SUNY New Paltz, and it is we in New York City call it upstate. Upstate New York does not call it upstate at all. It's Ulster County, about 2.5 hours from the city. And it was a vastly different world for me. So grew up in Brooklyn, went to high school in Manhattan on 49th and 9th,
Mhm.
and then went away to school. So in terms of like my like immediate growing up while I was in Brooklyn, I saw white people, but we didn't interact with white people. And when I started going to school in Manhattan, I saw a lot more white people, but still didn't really interact with white people. In college, I was smack dab in the middle of interacting with white people. So that was a little different, only because it was really the first time where I was other. So my school was at that time really heavily white. We had a Black student union, so we always knew where to find the Black people.
Right.
But it was mostly, a predominantly white institution. So just being able to kind of navigate where you're now in the spotlight, I never had to think really about my Blackness until I got to college, where I was like, oh, this is different. Ended up creating a really tight knit group of friends who are still my friends till today, and they represent white, they represent Hispanic, they represent Black. But I had to find my tribe, right? I had to find kind of that space where I felt comfortable and felt like I could be myself, but also be open to the things that I wasn't aware of, like being open to letting people teach me things.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that. When I was growing up in Missouri,
Oh, wow.
um,
Okay.
I first went to a school where they bused us to go to school with like a multicultural, just
Mm-hmm.
different ethnicities,
Mm-hmm.
because my home school was all African American.
Mm-hmm.
So 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 they bused us to different schools so we would intermingle, and it was awesome. Like the kids, we didn't know any difference. We just all got
Yeah.
along. And then when I ended up going to the seventh grade, then it was all just African American kids again.
Oh, wow. Talk
Fast
about a
forward to,
difference.
yeah. So then moved to California, eighth grade. It was just 99% Caucasian kids. And so
Yeah.
that took a little bit of getting used to, because it was either a mix of kids or it was just all African American kids. So I was used to one or the other, just
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
just being one of five African American kids in a school. So
Yeah.
that took some getting used to, but it got easier over time. Like I said, I didn't see race as an issue. Some of the kids did at the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't. And
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I can totally relate to that. I can totally relate to what that experience is like. So now, fast forward to you becoming an author. What inspired you to become an author, and what do you find grabs your attention in terms of subject matter? And you've already kind of explained some of the things that
Mm-hmm.
you write about, but
Yeah.
especially children's literature. What grabs
Mm-hmm.
your attention there in that particular area?
Sure. Um, so I went to in New York, similar to like the fame school. Like if you're a dancer or a performer, you have to test into the school. I went into a high school. It was for creative writing, and you had to test into it. So I always knew like I wanted some sort of way to pursue writing. Um, and then as I was getting more on the creative side, I don't know if it was kind of mentioned, or I'm not even sure how it came to be, to think about it, that writers don't make a living. And I come from a Haitian family, as I mentioned. You're a doctor, you're an engineer, you're a nurse. They will give you a journalist. So I managed to find the thing that my family was like, all right, we understand this. So in college, I went into school for journalism. And then I got into the journalism my freshman year, and I was like, wow, there's really like the who, the what, the why, the how. Like you really have to, there's no place for you to color the story. It's really just the facts. Right. And now I'm learning like there's different types of journalism, but at the time it wasn't taught to me that way. And I was miserable. I was like, remember, creativity is what fuels me, right? I'm like, there's no room to be creative in this story.
Right, it's not.
So I shifted gear and went into psychology and graduated with psychology. And then my master's graduated in organizational leadership. So I shifted away from writing for a while because I just didn't see a way to make a living out of writing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you have, and I think it's something that anybody creative, whether you're a musician, whether you're a performer, there's something that always pulls you back, right? Even if you're not doing it to make a living, there's always going to be a piece of you that feels unfulfilled if you're not doing that kind of work.
Right.
So I just started writing again in 2019, mm-hmm. Where I started writing specifically for educational companies. So the companies that make like textbooks for kids, like the lessons that they do in classes. So I started doing some of that. Yeah. And then from that, I kind of just went back to like doing the stories that are interesting to me and creative. And then from there, I just was like, okay, I guess you could make a living. And I have a full-time job that I'm like really satisfied with. I enjoy the work that I do. So I'm not looking to become a full-time author, but I'm looking to make a living out of it. And it's been since 2019. And so far I'm establishing a career in writing that I feel like eventually, if I'm doing it full time, that it will sustain just my living as I'm making it now. So it's a slow and steady process, but it's one that I'm enjoying rediscovering.
What was the most difficult part of getting published at first?
It's knowing how to pitch. So I'm both traditionally published with like educational materials, and then I'm indie published with the more creative stuff.
Yes.
And either way, you are selling your story to an audience, whether that's a traditional publisher who's gonna take you on and let you write the story, or it's an audience as an indie publisher where the reader is gonna either accept or reject what you're providing, right? So really learning how to craft what your story is and really delivering that. Most times you're going to be delivering it through written form, right? But there will be times here when we're talking that you'll be delivering your message just verbally. And it's really difficult as a writer because we're great at the written form, but the speaking is not our forte for most of us. But just the passion for what you do does come across. So even if it's kind of the nervousness around like, I'm not in front of my computer and I'm not typing this, because I can craft you a great story, but once you ask me to say it, it's a different matter. Even then, letting your passion for the subject come through, but really just honing your pitch, because that really makes a difference, whether it's in written form to get somebody to raise their hand and say, we'll publish you, or it's written or not written to get an audience to say, oh, this is interesting, I'll read this book.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now tell us about Happy Harper Comes Home. What was the inspiration behind that book?
Oh, so Happy Harper Grandpa Comes Home. So yes. Happy Harper is a character that she's been in my head for so long, I don't even know when she came in. She's this, so maybe tie back to my growing up, we weren't wealthy by any means. I believe you'd call us working poor. My mother is the queen of the MTA. There is not a place in Brooklyn, in the city, in any of the 5 boroughs that my mother is not just like, as long as I have a Metro card, well, back then it was a token. As long as I have a token, we're gonna go explore. And when we couldn't afford to really explore and get on the train, on Flatbush, we had what were called the dollar vans, and you'd hop in. It was just $1, less than $1.25 that the subway was. When we really were broke, we just walk. So
Wow.
there was never a space in Brooklyn where I was like, oh, this is boring. Like, my mother made everything an adventure for us. So I grew up just kind of seeing things and poking at things. Like in the 4th grade, I used to go to after school in a church down Flatbush. On the back of the church, after it rained, we used to go digging for like worms and snails. Like, we grew up that kind of childhood, and Brooklyn in the 90s was not that kind of space. You really had to keep your kids safe. It wasn't the gentrified Brooklyn that it is now. But we didn't know all of that was going on because we were really sheltered, and our family just made it an adventure for us. So that's where Harper came from. There's something for you to find exciting and explore and really hone in yourself. Like, a lot of the adventure, a lot of the courage, a lot of the willingness to try things that I get was because my mother cultivated that kind of space. And I wanted to create a character that encourages little kids to do that, right? That you don't have, maybe you are growing up in the ghetto, or maybe you are growing up in the trailer parks, or maybe you are growing up in areas where people look down and are like, ooh, what do they do there? Like, just go home and lock their doors because it's so violent and scary. But it doesn't have to be your perception of where you live, right? So I just wanted to create that kind of character that gives children the ability to be brave and to explore the world around them.
And I think a lot of kids will be able to connect to that too. I mean, I've over the years, I've worked with kids from just a variety of socioeconomic backgrounds. And you just, sometimes it just breaks your heart to see a child that comes to school and you can tell they don't have a lot. And so those kids, especially, I mean, all kids need attention, but those kids, especially that come from difficult backgrounds, they need a little extra attention and a little more care. And just being able to be a positive role model for kids like that, to let them know, hey, you can, your life will be better one day, and you just have to stay positive and work hard and keep your studies up the best that you can, because like I said, some of these kids have very difficult backgrounds. And so just to keep their spirits up and to give them something to hold on to and to look forward to and to inspire them is just, to me, is very awesome.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I don't believe that art is something that's reserved for those with money, right? There should be joy and beauty of life, where whatever the situation that you're living in. So if you're in a homeless shelter, we need to find a way to give you joy and beauty and creativity. If you're living in a mansion, you should have joy and creativity. And just, there should never, beauty and art should never be reserved for one type of socioeconomic status. It should be something that, regardless of your situation, that you have an opportunity to enjoy.
Absolutely. Now tell us about the art book for your book.
So I worked with this amazing illustrator named Fatima Hakim. So she is based in India. Well, she just moved to the UK now. And it was like the kindred spirit. Like, you didn't know that there was another person living halfway across the world who was you, but in a different culture, in a different way. She's neurodivergent, so she's talked about it before. Like, she has mental health issues. She learns differently. So it was a little difficult at first to figure out, how do we communicate? And I think that was the longest part of the process. So if I'm asking you to draw this, so if I'm asking you, for example, to draw Harper, and emotions were one of those things that were difficult for her to draw. So if I'm asking you to draw Harper happy, I needed to learn how to communicate in a way that she understood what happy meant. So it actually made me take a step back to be like, so what is happiness? Like, how do you express happiness on your face? What happens to your eyes? How do your like jaws shift? Where does your mouth go? Like very granular things that kind of you take advantage when you think in kind of a typical way, typical with quotes, that I had to learn how to communicate. And then she had to learn how to communicate with me. And sometimes it was kind of challenging, but I think the process of going through that together really allowed us to create the book that's there now. And I could not have chosen a better illustrator as a partner.
That's awesome. And especially when you can get those two things copacetic and working together. That's awesome. Now, what is the age range for your readers for the book?
Sure, it's ages 5 to 8. So that's the age range for the series. We had a lot of fun just a couple of weeks ago doing a reading where we had our youngest. She was maybe 2 years old. She stayed interested. She liked more. We had like crayons and just stuff that she can color from the book. She was a little better with that. But 5 to 8 is our sweet spot.
What is it like for you doing the readings and reading to kids and seeing their expressions and their reactions to what you're reading to them?
It's a lot of fun. So the story is about like the joy of being able to see somebody that you love, that you want to be able to live with them, but they're not necessarily there with you, right? So one thing that I find really just heartwarming is being able to ask the kids questions about who are those people that they're like, man, I wish this person lived closer, or man, I wish I could see them every day. And to me, that really gets at the heart of the story when I like can ask the kids to tell me about, okay, so your favorite aunt that you haven't seen in 2 years because of COVID, you know, what's the first thing that you want to do when she comes over, you know, and then they're painting this picture about, oh, we're going to go swimming, or we're going to go to the park, and then she's going to get on that swing and I'm going to get on that slide. Like they just get really excited because the story, this is Harper's story, but it's really the story of anybody who's ever been like distanced from somebody that they love.
Mm-hmm.
You're not, you know, just because I like to say that distance doesn't mean that it distances the love. So you still have that person connected to you. So getting the chance to think, wow, what would it be like if I could see them every day, and getting excited to explore that is great.
That's amazing. That's just awesome. Now, tell me too, Kayla, if you would, what have you learned in terms of just being an author, and what advice would you give to a beginning author, people out there just wanting to get into the field of writing, whether it's children's literature or any writing for that matter?
So I'm going to give two pieces, if that's okay.
That's absolutely perfect. That's fine.
The first one is that and it's kind of connected, you have to understand your motivation for writing. Yes. If this is going to be more than a hobby, you have no choice but to learn the business side of writing.
Right.
So you have to understand marketing, and you don't have to start by understanding it, but you have to be willing to learn, because the creative side and the business side cannot work independently if you want to make a living out of this. So really just being open and willing to learn. The business aspect of writing is something that I think is, if you're going to come in and you're like, I'm going to make a living, you have to be really aware of it, and you have to be very intentional if you don't have the business acumen. On the other side as well is, so there are tropes, and a trope is basically just a kind of story you know, universal tropes like missing somebody is a universal trope. Everybody can understand what it means to miss somebody. Everybody can understand what it means to have your heart broken. That's a universal trope. So there are all of these things that sell or don't sell. And everybody is really writing the same story. It's your lived experience, it's your perspective, it's your eyes, it's the way that you shape the words, it's the specific word that you use, it's the sentence structure that makes that story unique.
Right.
So I think understanding what your own voice is and really getting comfortable, and that only comes with practice. So the more you're writing, the more your voice starts to come out, so that when your readers who are reading you, who are going to start being long-term readers of yours, they can pick up your book. They don't even have to see that your name is on there. They start hearing your voice. So that's another part of it, that I think you just have to hone that voice, because otherwise you're in a sea of everybody else, because we're all telling the same story, if we're being honest.
Did you have any writers growing up that just you read their books and you're like, wow, I love that? For me, it was Beverly Cleary.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I was known as the book nerd. My nose was always like this in a book. I'll tell you the most impactful from an early perspective. I had plenty of writers at different stages of my life that made an impact, but the most impactful in the 5th grade, when I was graduating the 5th grade, Miss Romaine, my 5th grade teacher, gave me a number of books. And one of the books that she gave me was the Diary of Frank. And that was the first time in my life that, one, I recognized that your voice, you don't have to be an adult to have something that to say.
Right.
2, you can change the world with just a pen. Like, you can write, and what you've written can make a difference in this world and just change people's hearts. It can change people's minds. It can change their perspective. It was eye-opening for me that there was such power in the pen. I was like, I've been keeping a diary since I was, 7 years old. And now it's a journal. So the idea that what I was writing in my diary could make a difference in this world, that was mind-boggling to my 5th grade self. So that was the most impactful for me at an earlier age.
Yeah, isn't it amazing how things that happen to you, events that happen to you as a child, kind of stay with you the rest of your life?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I found that to be true too, from events that happened to me, whether I was at home or at school. I mean, there's certain things that just kind of grab you, or even a teacher. I mean, I've had teachers that just have their lessons to me, and just the way they treated me. I mean, that stayed with me, and that's influenced me as an educator too, just wanting to be that positive role model that kids don't forget. Like, they'll think of you 20 or 30 years later and say, I remember that person. I remember Mr. Scott. He was a good guy. And that's, to me, that's always been my goal. So,
and you can influence that the opposite way, right? Like,
yes.
there are kids who are fueled by the teachers who were not the Mr. Scott, who were not the Miss Romaine, who were not the Miss Xavier. Like, there were kids who were like, I don't ever want that experience repeated for somebody else. And hopefully you don't have to be the person to make somebody feel that way as a way of motive. Because I used to know some hard teachers who were like, I'm setting you up for the real world. The real world will come enough. Like, create that safe space when the child has it, and allow that to happen. So
yeah, you're absolutely right. The good ones stay with you, and the not so good ones stay with you too. Yeah, that was perfect. Go ahead. No, ladies first.
I was just actually thinking the idea about how situations can impact kind of your trajectory in life, right? So I probably speak about being Haitian and my Haitian American culture Now as an adult, as I've grown to understand it and to really like be okay with it. But growing up in Brooklyn in the 90s was not a space that was safe for Haitians. Um, we had a huge march across the Brooklyn Bridge to protest. At some point in the early 90s, we weren't allowed to give blood because there was the CDC put out a warning that all Haitians have AIDS, so they weren't allowed to donate blood. Wow. So the idea of, and I think that goes back to Harper and the way that we work with kids, there will always be a narrative that is put on you. You don't have to accept that narrative. And I think I did not realize that growing up. And especially whether it's from a social economic standpoint, whether from a cultural standpoint, you get to decide what that narrative is for yourself. And I want that, if there's no other takeaway from this for, people who write for children, especially, you get to help them decide what they internalize and what they say, this is your problem. This is not mine. I'm not taking it on.
Wow. Powerful words, Kayla. Powerful words. Thank you. I mean, I can relate to that so much. Finally, Kayla, before you go, where can people find Happy Harper Grandpa Comes Home? Where can people pick it up?
So everything that you need to know is at happyharperbooks.com. So happy, Happy, Harper, Harper, books.com. And I'm also on the interwebs at Happy Harper Books. You can find me on Instagram mostly when I post, or Kayla Marie Pierre, writer Kayla Marie Pierre on the Instagram. But if you go to happyharperbooks.com, you'll get all that information.
And I will make sure to put all of that in the show notes too, as well.
Fantastic. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, Kayla, it has been an honor and just a huge pleasure to have you on the podcast today and on the video version of the podcast too. I really appreciate it. So Kayla, thank you so very much for doing it. I really appreciate it. It's just a blast having you on.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm super excited. I'm so glad that Isabel connected us.
Yes.
She's been my walking partner lately with just doing in-person events for the children's books. So I'm really excited. So thank you for having me. And I hope this was helpful to your audience.
Yes, it will be. You're welcome. And Kayla's referring to Isabel C. Noboa, who was on the show a few weeks back.
C, don't forget the C.
Yes, C. She made sure to remind me of that too. Isabel C. Noboa. So she's an awesome lady. So it was awesome having her on. It was just as awesome having you on as well too, Kayla.
Awesome. Yeah.
So thank you so much. Thank you again, Kayla. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, everybody.
And so everyone, that was Kayla Marie Pierre. And please pick up her books, go to her website. She's an awesome author. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And with that, that is the end of this episode of the Total Podcast with me, your host, Phil Scott. Everyone stay safe, be careful out there, take care of one another, and we will talk again soon.